So this is the guys in front of you. Just look at them. I mean, you know, there's tons of experience here in front of you. And you'll get these slides, so we'll come on to this afterwards. But, you know, you have a very rich sectoral changes here, regional change, global, local, and integration of different systems. So Anne is coming from a local government organisation, but also has a tremendous amount of work to do in integration of NHS and social care. So quite complex work there. Okay, let's do the next one. What is resilience to you? You may have been coming in thinking about it for yourself. You may be thinking about it for your teams, your organizations, and you might, as many people do, be thinking of the words cope, bounce back, the normal words that people use, particularly in work, actually. And often, in fact, in social media, we'll quite often get the hero, you know, punching through, getting through, toughening up, etc. We've been in this field for many, many years. We know that resilience is about adaptability. It's a strategic capability. The measure of your resilience is the measure of your capacity for change. So what we see is that whilst people may even want to make change, if they do not have sufficient resilience, they will not be able to enact on that change. Okay, and particularly for those who are hijacked by any stress reactions, chronically or not, in an acute crisis, you may find that. So while you're pushing change forward, you may experience either apathy, resistance, and actually quite a lot of dysfunction even when pushing change. So this relationship is actually equal, and we're going to hear from the guys what they think of this. So let's go to the next one, Ellie. This is why this matters. This is our foremost model, the resilience dynamic. Anne is practicing in this and debriefing clients with their own resilience and what they think about it. It shows a spectrum of resilience from breakdown through to breakthrough. And the most of the working population is sitting in that yellow bubble, actually, around the coping bounce back. Coping's healthy enough. There is no surplus for change. So anything lower than coping, you will actually find difficulty in enacting change. Incremental stuff maybe, but anything significant is hard. Anything above it, you know, so investing in resilience is actually investing in the potential for change. So that's where we're coming from. And just to show you a little bit about why that then matters, Ellie, go into the next one. Change is so difficult, and I'm sure the guys are going to talk about this. And our research around this shows that often change programs, change management focuses on the stuff that you can measure, the metrics, the processes, the systems, and the intangible stuff is left. It can be enacted on by local people, by leaders, but if it's not aligned and really connected, then this is where an awful lot of change falls down and you get stuckness. Let's go to the next one, Ellie. Our work features a lot from Josh Berson's work from Deloitte, and he talks now about, instead of change management, change agility. So he's got 10 points that he's actually saying the point in time style way of thinking about change. I'm doing a program, it's a start, a middle, and an end. He's saying, forget about that, move into more agile ways of working. And I think, Priyanka, you were just nodding. I think that's definitely something within the IT field that's been embraced for quite a long time. And this notion of change agility, small changes, multiple iterations, adaptability, high energy, very, very key is where direction of travel. Okay, so knowing where you are. So that's a really strategically different way of thinking about the world. Let's just go to the next one. The difficulty is that there's only about 1/5 of companies that are actually really doing that. This is again taken from Josh Berson's work on healthy organisations, and he talks about different levels of organisations in terms of their healthiness. And the level 4 is where there's a really healthy organisation able to really adapt and perform and cater for well-being all at the same time. So they're doing something really interesting. I definitely commend the research on it for anyone in OD or HR or who's leading change who's on the call today. So let's go to the next one, Ellie. We in the Resilience Engine have really come to understand that whilst people want to understand the resilience, unless they see it first, the change is not possible. So we built a new application called the Resilience Dynamic Dashboard to help people self-assess and track and really get to see whether it's individual, team or organizational change, or organizational level, where their resilience is at. And that allows them to do course correction actually in the moments, in the weeks, rather than waiting for the usual sort of survey at the end of the day. So we've got, I just finished that slide, Ellie. So it's a C, understand, and then you can optimize. Okay. And I think unless you go through those stages, if you dive into trying to understand, obviously some people will get it. There'll be maybe 20-25% of your people who are really pioneers and want to get this stuff, but the wad in the middle, the normal inert crew, will be stuck, and they need to have much more of a paced approach. Okay, and the last one is, and just to let you know, we're absolutely thrilled to do this. We have been working with Google for the last 2 years. We've proven the combination of this dashboard allowing people to see and understand and track, and on top of that, some activation, if you like, through coaching or workshops or whatever, there's an increase of 20% potential of resilience within a matter of months. So, you know, we're really proud to bring that out to the marketplace and excited to work with organisations about it. That's enough from me. I know we're going to go to Anne first, and I've asked each of our panelists to consider 3 things. What kinds of change are hardest, easiest? What makes change successful? And what stops change from being successful? So we're going to stop the slides for now, and Anne, over to you.
So, you know, you're talking about, well, your first question was around the kind of change that's hardest or easiest to put in place in organisations. And when I was thinking about that, I was thinking, well, you know, it's not a sort of black or white answer to that, because it would depend, just as you've said, on where an organisation might find itself on the resilience dynamic. And I was thinking about a lot of the, you know, I work in public sector and Angus Council. I was thinking a lot about the public sector right now and thinking, well, where are most of these organisations right now? And I would guess they might just be in coping, especially with all of the cutbacks and everything that are going to be happening, with staff shortages, with so the things that are happening within organisations, and also the things that are happening to individuals in their personal lives as well. And it's almost like a perfect storm coming together. So people, the organisations that might be at breakthrough on the resilience dynamic, I'm wondering who they are. Because I don't think I've ever worked in an organisation at breakthrough, but these would be the organisations where change would just be a given. It would be constant. People would expect it. They'd be really thriving in change, irrespective of whatever the change is.
And Anne, if you took that idea, I mean, the NHS, for example, is under constant change. I'm sure it's the same in other healthcare systems, Priyanka. And of course, the whole legislation of bringing integration of these 2 systems, you're forced to change, and yet some of your people might be at coping. So how do you do it?
Yeah, so that's a big question, Jen. How do you do it? There's that battle between knowing that in that kind of environment, there's that fundamental change that does have to happen. And yet individuals are hanging on to the stuff that they know is safe. And also in these large organisations where it's all very well to consult, collaborate, co-produce with people within organisations, but what happens once they come out of that room or that forum and go back into the workplace? So I think that's where the sort of paradigm shift in thinking becomes more difficult when, especially in larger organisations where people are in their own services, directorates, where they're clinging on to the things that they know are the things they've always done and they feel safe in. And sometimes that might be one of the safest places they can find is that team or service where things have always happened in the same way, rather than stepping out into what normally would have been their safe space, their home lives or their personal lives, and it's no longer happening for them there.
And have you seen change that's been successful, Anne? I mean, there's a certain experience here that you have in many ways, and it's, in some ways, I've been around the health and social care services for many, many years, and yet I know that change is really possible. I've seen it, I've witnessed it, and I'm wondering sort of what makes for successful change in the middle of that environment.
So I've worked a little bit with the Health and Social Care Partnership, especially with the resilience questionnaires that that we've been using there and working with people one-to-one. So these might tend to be one-off conversations that I have with people. The change so I can't really comment on health and social care integration, and that's for someone who works in there. I mean, the change that I've seen in the organisation since I've been there, which is 14 years, has been that when I first started, it was very much a hierarchical organisation where if I wanted to put something in place, then I would have to check with my manager, who would check with their manager, who would check with their manager, and it would just feel as if you were almost in mud where nothing was really moving on. And change took years sometimes to implement. But now, just through keeping our heads down, keeping focused on trying to make change, it feels like real change is happening in the organisation I work in anyway. And that now we just get on and do things. We don't have the same hierarchy to go through. And change seems to be faster because we're really focused on action rather than just talking about things now. There's also been a fundamental change in encouraging people to create these spaces where people can take up their own power. So rather than that old phrase of empowering people, which would imply that we are the ones that have the power to hand on, it's about creating these spaces of power where people feel they can make their own decisions and go ahead and put change into practice.
And I mean, Priyanka, Liz, you may have questions for Anne as well. Feel free to jump in. It's such a different sector than your own. I wonder if anything's coming up for you that's resonating or that you want to know more about as a result of what Anne said already.
I think it's a very interesting journey to hear about, Anne, so thanks for sharing it. The only question will be, how do you drive change when it's difficult to put people through the change journey with a mandate? It's more about them in this kind of a space. It's more about them believing in the journey versus having a mandate to go through this change journey. So what's been the unique proposition that you've adopted to drive this kind of a mindset shift?
What we've been doing over the last few years is really, rather than consulting with people, starting with co-production in mind. So, when we reviewed our values a few years ago, and we did that didn't happen overnight. So it wasn't just a case of saying, these are our values, here you go on with it. It was about, putting a lot of time and effort into encouraging people along to discussions and forums to talk about what was most important to them. So that whatever values we came up with were those that had been agreed by most people, and they were willing to take. So it's almost like coaching where, if people are coming up with their own solutions, then they're much more likely to to go forward with that. And it was the same for these kind of the values that we came up with.
Thank you.
Well, it takes a lot of effort, that, and a lot of expertise. That whole thing about psychological safety comes up for me, Liz. You know, I'm just wondering whether it resonates for you around what Anne's saying as well.
Oh, definitely. And I guess, you know, it's interesting. I was drawn to the comment about empowerment, and I guess, you know, we're in the world of change where we need to step up some of the accountabilities as well. So, you know, giving people the clarity of direction and the narrative, but also the accountability, so that they do own something of the change. And I guess in the corporate world, it is about corporate survival in a way that if we don't do that, there's a risk of the business failing financially and being bought over. But whereas I guess the sort of healthcare, you know, it's always going to be there. It needs to be there. There is an element of continuity that will, whatever happens, will exist. Whereas the risks are probably more prevalent in a corporate world potentially. I don't know whether that sort of resonates.
So as I said, I'm not in healthcare, but I'm in a local authority. So I think putting aside the risks to the sort of prevalence of an organisation, it's just the risks to individuals really. And so that psychological safety is so needed in today's world where, you know, people are overwhelmed with the amount of work. And so it could be that colleagues and team members are no longer seen as a priority. And so it's about just keeping reminding people that it's up to us all as individuals to make that our main priority, so that we can have that psychological safety for people to be vulnerable and to have these conversations that need to happen. And for the people that I work with whose resilience is lower, then it's very often linked to their feeling that psychological safety with their manager is not present. And then there's also something about managers maybe being, maybe ignorant is too strong a word, but some managers thinking that they're creating a psychologically safe space just by saying, "Are you okay?" and expecting somebody to open up in response to that. So it's about educating people as well and continuing that discussion.
Yeah. And I think one of the issues that isn't the case in private sector is public sector is such a political football, isn't it, Anne? So the change that's, you know, stakeholder management in it is just a nightmare. And also there's always great ideas structurally about how it ought to be organised, and aren't there? I mean, every few years it's like, how many local authorities will we have? Should we centralise this bit? Should we not? You know, but the accountability on the services is just a huge pressure because you've got to account for the public purse. So I find that one of the most pressurised organised, you know, to work in all of the public sector. And I work in all sectors. So I think that's an interesting thing. It's just how much pressure adds to change in its success or not. I wonder what you all think of that.
That's an interesting one, isn't it? It's push and pull, you know. So for some people, it might be the push they need. And some people need to be sort of pulled along. And actually, so I guess, you know, and each individual, and I guess for me, there's a lot around people's experiences of change and where they are in their context. And if they had a good experience, then that might set them up differently to people who've perhaps experienced change in a bad way and therefore come with all that sort of expectation of what it might be like.
I think the pressure from our point of view, the people that work in our organisation, I was really struck since I've been there about how they really are dedicated to their jobs. The pressure though from things like the best value audit, you know, I think just adds, so they're already dedicated, but adds, you know, the indicators within these really add to the focus, and so really help them perform even more. And so the audit that we've just had in Angus has been one of the best that's ever happened. So even in the light of everything that's happened in recent years, we've still managed to, to achieve and more than achieve in that.
Oh, that's bravo. I mean, I find that really curious. I don't know others, I just would say if there's any questions for Anne, you're having to leave in a few minutes, aren't you?
Yes.
I believe. So if you've got any questions now with anybody, please put up your questions now, and Anne might be able to take them before we go. But Anne, if we can ask your grace, if you do anything that does come up, we could maybe follow up with you and get that out to everybody who's here. So I'm not seeing any questions right now. You maybe just sitting in the mulling of things like co-production, accountability, pressure. Is it good, bad, indifferent? What's the impact of resilience? There's quite a lot already on the table here in terms of topic. Anne, would you say anything else? And did you bring anything else in your thinking that you would want to share with us before you have to go today?
The only thing that I had been thinking about was, when you asked that question, what is the most difficult or the easiest change? Then obviously what we normally hear is culture change is the most difficult. And then I thought, well, but what exactly does that mean? So I think it's really easy for us to use phrases like that and to accept it without actually dissecting it and thinking, what does this mean? And, change that involves hearts and minds, then if people are feeling in that, and obviously every single individual in an organisation makes up the culture. So if individuals are feeling under stress or their resilience is low, then they're not going to be able to, changing their hearts and minds becomes much more difficult too, just as you said in your introduction as well, because we all need that safety rather than sort of, soar with change.
And then it's a lovely way to sort of end this piece of it. I would love to chat more, but we are on for just an hour together. And there aren't any direct questions, Anne, so I just thank you so much for your
Thank you very much. I'm sorry you've got to go. I'd love to see the rest of it.
You will. You'll see the recording. So, Priyanka, I know you are also under time constraints because of travel, etc. So, maybe you could also share then your thinking about these three questions. What's hardest, easiest? What makes for good change? What destroys it? Even that success. What's your thinking on it?
Right, and thanks, Jenny. I think to me, I'll start with a very simple approach that we've had in our mind as an organization, right? So let me go a bit back into the history. And to me, change is always easy or hard depending on what perspective we don on our heads and what's the messaging we take to the larger organization. And to me, it becomes very difficult to drive a change when you cannot answer what's in for me for people. For an individual, when I'm being part of a change journey that an organization is driving, it's so important that you start to answer what's in for me. And a lot of times that's the intent and that's the commitment we do take on as organizations. But there are times when it's difficult to abide by that. And I'll just rewind a few years back into our company's journey, because Ericsson has been in existence for more than 140 years. It has a huge legacy to itself. But we live in an ever transformative, disruptive industry because we get disrupted by the technology every 2 to 3 years, right? So we are commissioned to the task of being adaptive to change. And the paradox is that, while you're embracing change technologically, culturally also you've got to embrace change at the same speed and pace. The only way in which organizations can drive hard choices, hard changes successfully is by having a real narrative being made clear to people. So a few years ago, in Ericsson 2017 mid or 2017 beginning, we were at the rock bottom of our existence. So to say, we had our financials going out of our way, we had technology not being on our side, we had competition outperforming us, so we had senior leaders leaving the company, we had everything going southwards. And there was every single reason why our people should have jumped off the ship and believed that there will be better shores and ships outside the one they were banking on to be with. But what really happened in the hindsight was that in spite of all the odds, employees believed that there is a higher purpose and this is just a phase, it's a blip. There will be peaks and troughs, and this is one of those for Ericsson. And trust me, where we went to from within just 2 years of that rock bottom, we got back to our technology leadership, very strong positioning in the market, leading in the competitive landscape, having the same set of people and the best people working for us endlessly, like tirelessly believing in the higher purpose. So to me, the change always comes easy to organizations who believe in the higher purpose, who communicate. There are times when you have to make the commitment to define what's in for me. There are times you cannot because of confidentiality, because of lack of clarity to yourself as an organization, because you don't know what the next turn holds for you as a company or as a strategy. And in those times, it really helps to have an organization that can have people who trust in it. The only other thing I would say, Jenny, to this, the real mantra behind how we make changes successful, I would say sits broadly on 3 tenets. How do we, during our good times, as well as challenging times, we invest in a clear communication narrative, and I'll talk a bit more about that. The second thing is, how do we invest in a change mindset, a growth mindset? The people understand, what will this change really cause, and how do they approach that change? The whole mindset piece becomes important. And the third is the culture. How do we invest in the culture? So to me, communication, mindset, and culture are 3 key tenets on which we can successfully drive change, no matter how grave or positive the situation is. When it comes to communication, extremely important to have a purpose-led narrative being made available to people. And I think, like Anne just said, it has to be co-created. And narrative doesn't come from the corner office or from the leadership team. It gets co-created. And that narrative has to be purpose-led. People have to see the end-to-end journey, not just the next milestone or just not the immediate next turn. The moment they see the end-to-end narrative, they're also prepared for not every single step going in the right direction. You may move 2 and come back 4 and move 3 and come back 2, but they will start to stay resilient and committed to the journey when they see the North Star, the larger purpose that you are embarking on this journey for, and the faith in the leadership team. And leaders play a very important role while communicating, reinforcing, and building the trust in the journey in the organization. So to me, that's one big thing: communicate, communicate, communicate. The second thing I would say very big is the whole thing around the whole growth mindset, right? Every opportunity can be taken, or any situation can be taken as an opportunity or as an obstacle or a challenge, right? So simple thing like a COVID, and everybody had to work overnight from home, creating a big risk on business continuity, our ability to deliver to our customers. And telecom became a little bit like the backbone of how the world survived during the last 3 years, right? And how do you get people to embrace that passion about coming out of their homes and still delivering what we needed to do for the larger cause? So to me, that really, the mindset about taking every challenge as an opportunity, that really helped. And that growth mindset ensured that we take challenges with the perspective that we are all in it together. We succeed together, or we fail together. And that really helped us tide over this entire challenging or changing times, right? So change becomes more embraceable when that mindset becomes the forefront of how we are embracing change. And the last thing, like I said, extremely important, that we invest in the culture. A culture that encourages people to speak up, because when a change is going to happen, it's important that people can bring their perspectives to the conversation. What worries me? What bothers me? What excites me? What challenges me? So as long as the culture encourages speak up, at the same time, it kind of converges with empathy, that people believe that if I have a concern, or if my skin is in the game, there are people standing covering my back. So there's empathy, humanness in the way we are driving change, versus saying some will get under the bus and some will tide over, times to tell. That doesn't really help. So to me, the culture really has to be more collaborative, all inclusive, and building that sense of oneness in the team. And with this growth mindset, communication being done in a passion-driven manner, as well as having the culture, we can embrace changes, I would say, far more openly than in any other approach. So that would be my few cents, Jenny and Liz.
No, well said.
Yeah, very well said and very rich. And I just would invite anybody who's watching, and we can't see you, we know you're listening. I mean, Priyanka's thrown in these 3 key things, and we've already had some things from Anne. You know, what comes from me is the human connection and in it all together. I think that's really interesting, especially post-COVID. The faith in leadership, I think that's really interesting, you know, and obviously at the North Star idea of purpose, which is absolutely key to resilience and particularly to organizational resilience. So so here's a question for you, Priyanka, coming through, and Liz, I'm sure you've got stuff as well for Priyanka. What happens when a company communicates all the time internally, but the people don't trust what's being said? How can you be solved? Good question.
Very good question. And I don't think anybody's mastered the art of building trust. All I would say, it's an iterative process, and trust only gets built step by step, day by day, year by year. But what's extremely important is that leaders become the true brand ambassadors of the trust we build with an organization.
Yeah.
People don't trust the brand or the role or the salary slip. They trust the leader and the strategy and the purpose of the organization. And to me, as long as there's a very clear intent towards articulating strategy, your commitment towards the society to give it back, having the right values driving the organization, the right set of behaviors being rewarded or reprimanded, people start to trust the journey. And to me, the most important thing is trust doesn't get built by us having few nice words being carved out on a placard, but trust gets built when you start to map moments that matter for people. And to me, that's why you see, you know, Ericsson sees lots of people having worked here for decades and even for generations, because there's a very clear intent about keeping people at the heart of whatever we do and ensuring that we create a win-win strategy where the company does everything possible towards investing in the individual, both personally and professionally, and mapping moments that matter, because it's a life journey. You don't come in to do a job and go out. We're talking about humans and not about commodities, right? And the moment you have a win-win narrative, you clearly have a called out moments that matter strategy, and you have an empathetic human approach towards people. Like I said, at the rock bottom, when employees have every reason to jump off the ship, they'll still stay back and do their best to rescue the company out of the situation. And that's what happened in our case. So trust happens when you create those moments of proof points for the company and for the individual.
I've got so many questions for you. Liz, I'm wondering what comes up for you when you're listening to Priyanka.
Lots of things resonate for me, and you know, I guess some of the themes for me, you know, our organisation sort of a similar sort of, you know, journey, technological change, big decisions, change of CEO, change of, you know, selling businesses, you know, losing people, the survivors, and how do you build that to go forward? Purpose, meaning, you know, connection to what's in it for people, having that vision, but also that alignment such that it's the leadership building that trust, and also that narrative and connection from, you know, the top, middle and bottom, and also that it has a sort of two-way dialogue with itself in a way that have mechanisms for employees to speak up. So, you know, resource groups, you know, listening projects, you know, and building that culture, which does depend a lot on building trust and safety. And you've got to start somewhere in a way. And a lot of our change, I guess, you know, there's, in my mind, there's two sort of, you know, there's incremental change always going on at the background, but there's also times where we've you know, decided that we need a step change. And that's been, you know, where that change of narrative takes time to really get right and get well, and therefore the leadership are critical to make decisions and get that across absolutely clarity, such that that uncertainty and that space where things, stories and concern can take place, that clarity and quick decision making, I think is critical. But gosh, lots of things that, you know, the growth mindset, the narrative, the culture, but what actually is the culture and how you do that. I think Anne mentioned that. That's you know, always the holy grail, isn't it? So anyway,
I mean, I'm interested in the difference between Johnson Matthey and Ericsson, and whether the history, for example, matters, and whether Ericsson is a Northern European with the Nordic, potentially more humanistic. I don't know. I'm making a sort of broad connection here, Priyanka, into this to say, does the culture of Ericsson change? I mean, I worked in telecoms also, and that wasn't what I felt. I'm a coach and a resilience expert part because of that, difficult corporate experience in telecoms and mobile. And your ownership, Liz, comes from a really different place, doesn't it?
Well, yes, but our organisation is over 200 years old, right? So it's got a long history, and the other challenge is that you've sort of got 5 generations in the workplace now. So when we talk about growth mindset, I think it's having that. It's almost that support and challenge of all those different generations as you take them through change, and also the skill sets. I mean, we're finding, we're in hydrogen technologies, we're in batteries. Those, even the skills we need, to get people who are familiar with the manufacturing and hydrogen and that is a completely new skill set. So how do we then open people's minds to the fact that they can reskill and retrain and sort of be, and that's a big challenge versus bring people in who've already got it and those sorts of things for us. So but the fact that it's 200 years old, we've done it successfully in the past, but times are different. That there are such sweeping changes and so quickly that as an organisation that's often had time to make change, now you're finding that you've got very little time to adjust and make change, which is the real challenge.
I mean, and actually, just for anybody who's looking, and Priyanka, you were looking for questions, there is a little triangle, square and circle. Please feel free to jump in and pose any questions you've got here. Here's one for both of you. What tools would you suggest for leaders to build trust and a healthy people culture for leaders? What tools for leaders, would you suggest building trust and healthy culture?
I can just start with what we've been experimenting for a while now, and we see a huge change in the way we are experiencing trust building, going from pillar to pillar of strength, right? It's really about having a very laid out messaging around what behaviors will be valued, what behaviors will be expected from every single employee across the globe within the organization, right? And to me, it's not just about having something written down in a document. It's about how do you get this, bring it to life, internalize it. And we've started to take almost 100,000 people that we have across the company on a journey called Ericsson on the Move, where we have 5 behaviors that pretty much define the way we want to build trust amongst people, amongst leaders and people, amongst people in the organization, where we say every single individual will work towards being empathetic and human towards each other, towards leaders and employees. We will do everything possible towards rewarding collective collaborative success versus individual success. So trust only comes when they see the organization looking at collaboration and cooperation being the higher sense of achievement versus individual successes, right? The third thing I would say is really ensuring that we work with a speak up environment where people can bring their perspectives to the table. Whether they're speaking against the motion or for the motion, no problem. But speak your mind, and there will absolutely be no consequences. How do we make that far more visible and experiential to people has been our commitment. And then we work towards speedy execution, as well as having a clear understanding of what this speedy execution will mean, so that all the irritants and the disruptions go away, so people know that they will get all support possible towards making the end game happen. And then all this gets wrapped up with the values of respect, professionalism, and perseverance. So to me, as long as people understand the entire charter inside out, we do everything possible to bring it to life, both by people and by the leaders owning it. So you just don't adopt and embrace, but you also become an advocate of these values and behaviors. Trust grows leaps and bounds. And that has been at least our experience.
And I mean, within the resilience community, and I know some of us are around here, we've been leaning into values and connection around all of this all year. And, you know, with actually the whole notion of it's not enough to have a bunch of papers and the leaders actually talking about this, but it's got to be embedded, it's got to be in the culture, it's got to be activated at every level. So, and that, you know, what we're talking about is commitment. And yet that commitment, once it's almost the flywheel model, once it's up and running, it feels like it just goes, Priyanka. It's sort of, you know, it's a you know, it's a hockey curve approach rather than it going all the way, you know. So Liz, I'm sort of curious about you, what you would say about that question about to build trust and healthy people culture.
I do agree. Some, you know, a good code of ethics, good speak up, safety and mechanisms. A lot of things that have worked in our area are giving employees sort of you know, ability to create resource groups where people can be included and talk about some of the challenging issues and get them represented and be heard if that's what they need to be, and that really seen and celebrating some of their successes and differences. And that diversity of thought has been a big issue for us. You know, we have a lot of scientists, engineers, and actually a lot of diversity in that set, but also diversity of people and diversity of sort of relationship and relational sort of aspects. A lot of work, and I would add probably to Priyanka as well as that, as the leadership, is also the people management part of it, in that, you know, a lot of our people will, you know, set up meetings and set to task, you know, taking that time for people managers and cultures to value getting to know each other and being open about some of the challenges or debates or conflicts, and starting those conversations in a safe way, even, you know, and those are the sort of the moments that matter. We have that absolute belief that a people manager, every moment can matter to that sort of culture and building that trust. So at all levels, really, I think it's like any system. It doesn't really matter where you start, as long as you do start in lots of places, and that it sort of amplifies, if you like, across that system.
I think that's really interesting. You're naming the moments that matter. Simon's got a thing about that. And I, you know, before going to Priyanka on it, Priyanka, are you leaving in a minute? Maybe we do you first, you know, sort of just say more on that moments that matter strategy, and then we'll come back to Liz.
Sorry, I'm in this global leadership meeting, so I've got to be in and out. So I really had to, and Jenny is tough to say no to, right? So I had to agree to be with her during my lunch break. So I'm starving in my stomach now.
Oh, no, not good for your resilience.
But then it's a great question, Simon, on moments that matter. And the way I would put it across is, see, an employee has a life cycle. There are times when you're fully wanting to commit towards what the organizational needs are towards you. And it's no questions asked, no limits defined, and you deliver to what is priority for the organization at that time. And there are times when your family needs to get prioritized. There are times when you need flexibility because you can be your best in the afternoon hours, but you need your mornings to be committed towards some other deliverable or to your kids or whatever it is. So to me, moments that matter are time when employees need the organization to understand what's priority for them. And there are times when the organization needs to understand, so the people need to understand what is important for the organization, where you've got to drop everything and focus on making the organization successful. That kind of a relationship where the trust comes absolute convergence, when we do everything possible as an employer towards the employees, and employees do everything possible towards making the company successful. It really starts to build a relationship over decades, over generations, like Liz was saying, versus a touch and go relationship where they will be only friends for good times, and the bad times you will look around and have nothing and no one to support you. With that mindset, you see a strong loyalty being exhibited by your employees, and that's the only successful mantra to tide through tough times, because all organizations will go through tough times. There's yet to be an organization which hasn't been disrupted by all possible sorts of I would say reasons, and the organizations like Liz's and ours have survived because people believed in the larger mission, larger purpose, and it's only because of this commitment of moments that matter that made it happen. So that would be my few cents, and I'm really sorry I have to jump off, but I've loved being here and available at your disposal to answer any questions later on. So bring it on to me, Jenny.
Yeah,
and Liz, thank you
so much. Thank you so much. joining us today. And good
Thank
luck
you.
in season. Okay, I'll be in touch.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah,
Take
thank
care.
you.
Right.
Yeah, left with quite a lot of thought around all of that, Liz. I mean,
Yeah. I think it makes you realize how, you know, multidimensional it is.
yeah,
And I think, you know, every organization or structure system has to sort of find its way in, and then work the best way from there.
yeah.
Definitely.
What I'm actually worrying, you know, holding is the confidence. There's a thing about that reminds me about the resilience work that we do, which you're very familiar with, is on one side of the door, if you like, people feel that, oh, that's going to be hard work. It's going to add a lot to my workload, to my thinking, my effort, the pressure, whatever it is, to invest in the resilience of my team or whatever, right? And they go through the door, and on the other side, having even done something very simple, they realize that it's actually quite straightforward. It's very human. It's part of what we're already doing. And it's about just being more rigorous and focused and clear on it and accounting for it. Do you know what I mean? And on one side of the door, it's like, whoa. And the other side, it's like, ah.
Yes. You know, I actually thought about that before when I was doing my sort of thinking about this today. And at the moment, we have something, a big drive is to keep it simple, because often what we tend to do is say, oh, we're going to change this, we're going to change the process here, we want you to have a different behavior, but we never say what we want them to stop doing and give up. So this sense of there's more coming, there's more to hit you, there's more initiatives, it can be quite sort of, well, it sort of doesn't build it, it becomes skeptics. And then unless you're sort of somebody who's new to change and seen change, had a good experience of change and up for it, but over time, if you carry on doing that, then people get disengaged and feel that, you know, they're not listened to. So I do, you know, I think you're right, and I think there's something also about you know, celebrating, you know, the benefits, you know, this the make life, how do we make life easier for you? We're gonna, it may be a big step change and it's going to be hard to get there, but this is absolutely how it's going to change your life. There's also some risks with that. I mean, we've gone through some big system changes like Workday and big human, you know, so ultimately when you get big systems like that, you know, there is a risk to people who were doing relatively sort of jobs that system has taken away. So I go back to some of the Priyanka is how you get to know these people and how you support and challenge, but support those people through that journey. And you know, we've just, I mean, I remember with Unilever, we talked about it a lot about having good leavers. How do you help people to leave well? And I think that experience of change and going through that, of how people join, but also their life cycle and how they leave and they get supported to leave well, I think that's such a critical sort of story, because that is a feedback and a feed forward for people. You know, when people, one thing that has amazed me in the last, which I really feel proud of, is when I go onto LinkedIn, we've recently sold part of our battery materials. We decided to not go that direction. So a lot of people sort of moved on, good, technical, bright, fantastic people being with JM quite a long time. But then we see a lot of people on LinkedIn saying where they've gone and what their jobs are. And the amount of joy or proud or congratulations for those people is wonderful. And having that mechanism to know that people care about what happens to people beyond their relationship, it is incredibly important. That actually, wherever I am, whether I've left or whether I'm coming in or I'm in, those relationships and that care is going to be there with the people I get to know. So I think that's been quite a change. And you know, LinkedIn and places like that have created that ability, right? And relational.
Yeah, no, lovely. I'm opening up this for the last few minutes. We do have a poll. We're very interested in this. I mean, my head is a bit buzzed by this co-production, resilience and planning for resilience and leadership, for example, through to Priyanka's sort of three, you know, piece on comms, on mindset and on culture. Right. And then the whole thing, I mean, it really comes across as in a way, I think, you know, if organizations are listening to this and not understanding where to start, I think I would start with yourself, you know, is that you've got to kind of get this for yourself and actually believe it, and not just do the technical end of change. It's very human. You know, and from an organizational resilience point of view, we know that, you know, the amount of change that an organization can successfully absorb is fundamentally how much their people can absorb. You know, there are processes that are put in place, etc., and you'll have them for 200 years. But fundamentally, if the people can't operate that, actually, you know, so you're unleashing the capacity for change.
Yes.
Feels really at the heart of what we're talking about. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. A big focus on is the people engagement and you know, understanding that. And some of those things about listening and, you know, getting them to, you know, we have a lot of capability for continuous improvement in our engineering, and that sort of small, you know, small tweaks. How do we get better and better? I think that's almost a permission to people to say, well, how can we make it better at every small moment? And therefore those small differences can make their life better, and therefore more, they're contributing. They feel that they can impact. They have a contribution. And that goes two-way. So from the sort of, for us, it's the manufacturing, the shop floor even, to right through to middle management, and that can go up and down. And I think that sort of discourse and the way it's held, almost the culture of the conversation, is probably critical. You know, you can have conversations, but they can be very different in nature. And that, to some degree, like Anne said, that's where some of the coaching comes in. That support and challenge, right? The sort of things that, you know, Priyanka was saying, that when people are going through tough times, how does the company adjust and moderate and value that person, whether, you know, whether they're finding it, you know, high performing at that moment, or whether they're struggling because of other stuff. I think that is so critical. Yeah.
I mean, I think we've got a lot here, and, you know, I am aware we haven't managed to answer all the questions. I do apologise that, you know, we're coming to 12:29. I would love us, just in this last moment, I hope you've really enjoyed this and it's been thought-provoking for you, is just to actually fill in the poll real quickly about actually what might you implement as a result of just the stimulus and the thought leadership that's been provided by our three speakers today: Anne Lamont, Priyanka and Anne from Ericsson, and Liz Barnes from Johnson Matthey. Global, local, all those sorts of different sectors, etc. So the poll is available, as CJ is putting up, in the circle, square and triangle. Before you leave, please do that, and afterwards, you know, may your resilience be with you. Go well. Thank you so much for your activity, your questions, and your listening.